This is Paul Schmid. Welcome to the Pursuit Zone. West Hansen first paddled the Amazon at the 2008 Great River Amazon Raft Race in Peru. Their team won the race and set a new record in the process. On the flight home to Texas, West read the book Running the Amazon by Joe Kane and got hooked on the idea of paddling the entire river. He started planning the next year, and by August 2012 was back in Peru to begin his Amazon Express expedition. His goal for the expedition was to be the first person to kayak the Amazon River from its furthest source to the Atlantic Ocean. You can learn more about the adventure at AmazonExpress2012.com. West Hansen, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it.
West, what was it that first got you into marathon paddling?
Well, in college in the 1980s, I took a class in whitewater kayaking, and I was a whitewater kayaker for approximately 10 years before getting into marathon paddling. Now, as you can imagine, whitewater paddling in Texas is fairly limited. We don't have a lot of, pristine whitewater. We had to primarily rely on floods. I had maxed out all the whitewater we had here, and that's when I noticed the marathon paddlers who were pretty much paddling the same rivers I was paddling, thinking I was doing some, pretty good whitewater. And that just kind of bumped me up to the next level of paddling, watching these guys.
How was it that you ended up as part of that 2008 Great River Amazon team?
The team was led by David Kelly out of California, who is a famous international adventure racer, and he had done his fair share of ultramarathon paddling as well. And we had raced on a couple of ultramarathon teams, setting a new record in the MR340. We're on a team together, and we still hold the tandem record for that. And then he had been down for the Texas Water Safari as well. We got along really well. Along with David, Carter Johnson, who's a world record holder for 24-hour distance paddling on moving and flat water, lives near David in California. And he and I had never raced together, but we had raced alongside one another and got along really well. And David just put this team together, including Mike Scales from from Hawaii, who was an outrigger racer. And it just seemed to be a fun group of guys, and David knows quite a bit about how to put together a cohesive team, and he just invited me along. It was as simple as that.
On the way back, you talk about this book, Running the Amazon, and what was it about that really hooked you into this idea of going back sometime?
Well, that's a really great question. I was really, the big hook was my surprise in finding that not all the great expeditions had taken place, 100 years ago. I have this in my mind of Shackleton and Perry and Amundsen, Byrd, Sir Edmund Hillary, doing these monumental expeditions. Well, I found in Running the Amazon that in 1985 and 1986, these guys were the first to do the entire Amazon River. I mean, it was just shocking to find out that when I was a whitewater paddler in my 20s, not much different age than the guys that actually completed the Running the Amazon expedition, they were doing these great expeditions, these firsts. And that was during my lifetime, and I was just astounded by that. And so that led me to start thinking about, well, you know what? This is within my reach. This is something I can do. I can paddle forever. I'm not the fastest by any means, but what they did, I can do. As simple as that.
So that initial idea was in 2008, and 4 years later before you return, is that entire 4 years consumed with your planning of this expedition?
And a couple of years after the expedition as well. Yes, it was. It started as as a drop of water, as they say. And I started just reading everything I could about expeditions, started eliminating any variables that I could find, convincing my family that this really was going to happen. It really was consumed by it. It's funny because my daughter, at one point, a few months before the expedition, was just got frustrated with me. I was reading. The only books I was reading at that point were books about expeditions and about the Amazon River, all the research, and she insisted that I read something else. She's a teenager. She said, "Daddy, you got to read a book for fun. I'm tired of hearing about the Amazon." So I said, "All right." And so I saw Ann Patchett on the show with Stephen Colbert promoting her newest book, and just out of the blue, I said, "Okay, I'm going to order that book and read it." It turned out to be a book, a drama set on the Amazon River. And I had ordered it blind, and it was so funny. That was our going joke, was everything I had done for 4 years surrounded the Amazon or expeditions or something. Was extremely prepared, that's for sure.
Part of the planning process was you have to put together a team because this is an expedition that needs a lot of support. Tell me about how you went about assembling your team and just a little bit about who they were and what strengths that they had that you wanted to bring into your expedition.
Well, the team turned out to be the most important part of the expedition, not the gear, not the planning, not the research. And I had learned that through reading other books on other expeditions that weren't necessarily about the Amazon River. The success of these large expeditions really falls on the personnel and how well they get along. I took that to heart. I was very, what I thought was extremely discriminating as to who I was pulling into the expedition. There's some guys that were coming as part of the expedition, but since that I didn't know very well, but I kept their involvement to a minimum amount of time. If there was going to be someone on the expedition that was going to be there for a long time, then I would, scrutinize them quite a bit, their personality. The expedition, all expeditions run afoul for some reason, either weather or conditions or illness or equipment failure or something. And it takes personalities that can overcome things like that, and not someone that'll just throw up their hands or start having conflicts during those times in order to overcome them. On a more concrete level, I pulled from the Texas Water Safari, guys that had paddled many years with the Texas Water Safari for the flat water portion of the expedition, because I knew these guys, I didn't have to tell a thing. They knew how to support themselves. They knew how to go, paddle long distances and maintain their bodies, and they had the right mentality for ultra distance paddling. Whitewater guys, I had very little whitewater experience. I mean, it had been 20 some odd years since I'd really done any serious whitewater paddling. And my last whitewater paddle was, my last whitewater kayak was a perception dancer, which is, extremely old school. They had really progressed with equipment by the time the expedition rolled around. Fortunately, I got a lot of support from Jackson Kayaks. They provided all the kayaking gear, the whitewater kayaking gear, and they put me in touch with a lot of really experienced kayakers. In doing my research on the whitewater section, I was introduced to Juanito de Agarte. Juanito lives in Cusco, Peru, and speaks English. I met him on a trip down there when my wife were there. My wife and I were there on our 21st wedding anniversary, and we talked extensively, and he helped me pick the team for the whitewater section. I made it clear what my abilities were and did my best to train, but the guys that joined us on whitewater really, really did a great job of taking care of me and the rest of the team. Juanito helped me pick Rafa Ortiz. Rafa's famous for, among other things, going over these really tall waterfalls up in the Northwest and Chiapas, Mexico, and New Zealand. He's made several videos, and he's sponsored by Red Bull. But he's one of these young hot dogs, but more importantly, once again, he had that mentality that we're going to get along as a team, and he had very, very positive outlook. He's from Mexico City, so his Spanish is very good. It's his first language. And we had Tino Speck. Tino's from the northeast, around New Hampshire, but he spent a good portion of his life in South America, doing videography, exploring whitewater. he and Rafa made a good pair for the whitewater safety team. And it's well documented. He saved our lives many times along the upper stretches of the Amazon. And then finally, we had Simon Yerova. Simon is from Chile. He was a raft champion, a world raft champion, and he was going to be in charge of our raft on the whitewater.
You talked a couple of times about training and getting in shape. What did you have to do to get yourself into shape for this?
So I knew that it would be tough for me to make time for training. I wouldn't be motivated to do that. I was more motivated into organizing and setting things up. So I got help through a local gym with two personal trainers, one for weightlifting and one for movement, that I had scheduled workouts with 3 days a week. And if I hadn't had those workouts scheduled and those guys waiting for me, I seriously doubt I would have done any training at all. I probably started that strength and movement training too late in the process. I started working out with them about 6 months before the expedition. Prior to that, I had relied upon my usual training, which was just paddling. I should have done more cross training, more running, more movement other than just ultra distance paddling. I took it for granted that I could paddle, forever, because that's what I've been doing for 20 some odd years. So in hindsight, I should have done a little bit more than just paddle. Should have started the cross training a little earlier.
Tell me about, because I know from reading through your blog that you did whitewater training. Can you tell me about that?
You bet. As I mentioned, I hadn't really paddled much whitewater in 25 years or so prior to the expedition. So I know I needed to learn about the new gear, and I had to get my roll back down. It's not that I didn't know how to roll. It's just that it wasn't in my muscle memory any longer. As for picking the lines in the river, I knew I could rely upon the experts that were going to be joining the team, but I still needed to be able to hold up my end when it came to paddling a kayak. I looked for local paddlers here in Texas, some whitewater experts to help me train up, but those relationships fell through for various reasons. So I ended up just on my own doing the whitewater training. I took 2 trips out east where there was some bigger whitewater, but once again, I had trouble finding anybody to run the whitewater with me. I was just on my own, and it would be dangerous to go down the Ocoee or the New River, anything like that by myself. So I ended up at the U.S. Whitewater Training Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. And there I found some coaches to help me, in their whitewater park. Spent a week there honing my skills. I knew it wasn't the unpredictable river settings or the large scale whitewater that I was going to be running into down on the Amazon, but at least it was something. And under the tutelage of the people out there and the coaches at the Whitewater Training Center, I did feel quite a bit more confident going into the Amazon.
West, at some point during your fundraising, you get connected with National Geographic. Tell me a little about how that happened and how big a deal was that for your expedition and getting further sponsorships?
Being connected with National Geographic added a substantial amount of legitimacy to the expedition. I was introduced to National Geographic through Greg Trinish. Greg is the director, the founder, and the chief everything for Adventures and Scientists for Conservation. The organization, Adventures and Scientists for Conservation, the crux of it is Greg does his best to link together scientists who are doing or who need samples and research done in very remote areas with adventurers that are planning expeditions in those areas. And so I met Greg at the Outdoor Retailers Show in Salt Lake City through one of my sponsors, and we just started a dialogue and talking. And it turns out that there had been several travelers down the Amazon River, not necessarily on similar expeditions, but people gathering information for the Pacific Biodiversity Project. And so through that and through Greg's affiliation with National Geographic on other expeditions, I was able to secure an explorer's grant with the National Geographic Society. Now, along with Greg's help, I had the help of the team mentor, Piotr Kamilinski. And I'm so sorry, after all these years of knowing Piotr, I still have difficulty saying his last name. I'm from Texas, and my language, my ears and brain work much slower than the Polish language. But Piotr was instrumental in helping with my connections with National Geographic as well. Through them, and obviously through the application process, we were able to get a matching grant for approximately $35,000 for the expedition, which covered about a third of the cost of the expedition.
Well, let's get into talking about the expedition now. So I know there's a lot of logistics around getting the boats and everything down there, but let's assume everything's there. And where is it that you're starting in Peru?
The newly discovered headwaters, Rocky Cantos discovered this new headwaters, which made everything about the expedition quite a bit different than our original goal. And the new headwaters are located just in north central Peru. As the crow flies, it's about 200 miles east of Lima, which is the largest city and it's located on the coast, Pacific coast in Peru. So it's high in the Andes, approximately 14,600 feet. If you look right in the middle, it's just above Lago Junin. Lago Junin is the second largest lake in Peru, behind Lake Titicaca, and it's the second highest elevation lake in the world, I believe. Lago Acacocha is about 20 miles north of that.
How do you describe, because when I was reading through the material, it seemed to me there's sort of two parts to the river. You guys first get started into this, what I'll call the whitewater section, and then at some point in time you get into the flatwater section. Yes,
we approached in planning the expedition, I approached it in three different phases. The first phase was approximately 500 miles of whitewater, and we had a specific team for that, specific gear. And then when we got down to where the Apurimac River meets the Montaro River, that changes to the final 3,800 miles of flatwater, and we changed the entire team and all the gear for that section, and that goes through the red zone. The final third started where Peru and Brazil meet on the Amazon River and goes through the swamps and goes through the mangrove swamps and starts the tidal bore sections. We had to take a completely different approach to each one of those sections.
Let's talk about the first section. Tell me about what was day-to-day like for you there? How challenging was the whitewater?
The first section was the most unknown with whitewater, primarily because of the skill level. I didn't know the team as well, but primarily we didn't know the river as well, because the core team gelled quite well. But the Montaro had only been run once prior to our expedition, and that was only about 2 months before our expedition by Rocky Cantos, the guy that discovered the new headwaters. And so we didn't have hardly any information. Rocky gave us his notes and his maps on the Montaro, but they were very sketchy and subjective. Unfortunately, they didn't help us a whole lot. Plus, he had run it at a completely different water level. We were running it in the low water season. So all the rapids that he had described looked completely different. Some didn't really exist. We were able to just paddle around rocks, whereas other rapids were much more dangerous. So, it was very slow going because we had to do a lot of scouting. Then the logistics of getting the team around was huge. We had 3 vehicles with about 18 people. As I said, I threw the kitchen sink at this expedition, not having been on one before, and I'd rather have something and not need it than not have it. So we started up in the thin air of 14,600 feet at Lago Acacocha, where the water is just a trickle going into the Rio Gashan. And we started dragging and paddling through the 6 inches of water. And then eventually it turned into the Montaro proper, where it was deep enough to paddle. But we only had a limited amount of time with our whitewater experts. We called them tigers because they had obligations elsewhere. So the 2 weeks that we had them, we just leapfrogged and did what we thought was the most dangerous sections of the Montaro. We scouted from the road. We scouted, from high above on some cliffs that we hiked to, and we just kind of took a guess at where the river would be the roughest. And so we covered those sections, and then I came back by myself and in a kayak and ran the sections that were supposed to be easier in order to make best use of the personnel there. I had estimated it would only take us a couple of weeks to do those 500 miles, but it ended up taking us about 4.5 weeks, much longer than expected.
Next, you get into the second part of it, which you mentioned, the red zone. Tell me a little bit about the dangers you encounter in part 2.
Well, we didn't go into this blind. I knew exactly what we were going to run into in the red zone. Locally, it's known as the Vrae, V-R-A-E, the Vrae, where this big river basin, where these several of these rivers come together. This is the cloud forest of the Peruvian Amazon, which is especially good at growing coca. And so coca production is big there. Traffickers, this is where they get the bulk of their product. But it's also extremely desolate. There are hardly any roads to this area. The roads that are there are usually washed out, or they're just too dangerous to travel because they're perched on these mountain ledges, thousands of feet in the air. This is exactly what you would picture if you were to think Romancing the Stone or the movie Sorcerer or something like that. We were in very dense jungle. It's expert if you're wanting to get away with growing coca. Now, also in the area, you have the local tribes, the Ashkaninkas. They have been exploited over the past few centuries, ever since the conquistadors were there, for their land, for their minerals. Lately, it's been the oil exploration that's been in the area. And anytime someone comes into that area, it's not good for the Ashkaninka. They don't benefit from it. And that includes the coca growers as well, who are living amongst them. So, in short, we knew we would not be welcome. I mean, we did not assume that we'd be making friends with anybody down there. So our plan was to leave a very light footprint and to get through there as fast as possible. In doing so, we had to weave our way through the various power brokers in the area. And whoever had the guns, they had the power. So it wasn't like we could just go to one office and say, hey, can we have permission to come here? We had to negotiate different authorities there. But the main people that I knew that we needed permission to get through the area were the ronderos. The rondero were the police force put in place by the narco traffickers. It's just a bunch of guys with shotguns. The narco traffickers can't have lawlessness in the area when they're trying to move their product. This is a business for them. So they can't exactly have people using their product or any murders and just theft. They need order in order to run their businesses. They can't rely on the military or any police force because what they're doing is illegal. So it's this very strange juxtaposition that they want order, but they also want to move their, coca. And so we had to get permission from the rondero to get through that area. We had to actually get paperwork that indicated that we weren't part of any authority. We weren't part of the police or the military, and that we were just passing through. That's our business there. And they gave us the paperwork, so that worked out really well. That didn't stop them from, stopping us at checkpoints and pointing guns at us and things like that. So we had 2 instances where we had to be under, gunpoint with the rondero, but we also had one more instance, our initial instance, where the Ashkaninka held us at gunpoint because they thought we were aligned with the drug traffickers. So it was a really strange path to weave through there. We had to be friends with the drug traffickers, but we also had to be friends with the people that were opposing the drug traffickers. We just wanted to get through there as fast as possible.
Was one of those situations the one where you got the camera stolen?
No, that was in Brazil. We were held at gunpoint a total of 5 times during the expedition. Once we got to Brazil, we were charged. We had pulled over to camp on a sandbar, and all of a sudden, these 5 kids, they're teenagers, came running over the sandbar, screaming and, with their guns drawn, running towards us. And once again, they were looking for drugs. They were under the guise of a vigilante group that were supposed to be, helping law in the area, but really what they were just a bunch of kids with some cheap guns. And they searched all of our things. They didn't take anything. They kept asking for drugs. They wanted our drugs. Now, I don't know if they wanted them to traffic them or to take them or whatever. But, I mean, we had National Geographic flags hanging off our boats and sponsor stickers. And we must have been the strangest looking, drug runners they'd ever seen. But they obviously didn't find any. But they thought that we had videotaped them. And so they stole the camera that was given to us by National Geographic.
Let's get into the transition to the flat water part of it, and tell me about this epic boat that you have.
We had 3 boats, 3 kayaks for the flat water section, the final 3,800 miles. And while I was really used to really great fast boats with the ultra marathon racing I had done, this was an expedition, so we needed boats that could carry gear. We were going to be out on our own. Epic, I'd raced Epic kayaks, or I'd raced in Epic surf skis in several races, and I was really impressed with them. And Freya Hoffmeister had used an Epic 18X to go around Australia in her 9,000 mile solo voyage around Australia. So I was really impressed with their sea kayak that gave speed and storage space. It really closely resembled the racing kayaks that I had used previously. Well, Epic generously, gave me an 18X solo kayak to use for the Amazon expedition. It was a great boat. Really no complaints about it at all. For the tandem boats, we used, Epic didn't make tandems, so we used Valley sea kayaks. They had a couple of Alute 2s that were already laid up for an expedition, and they gave us a really good deal on those. So they held, obviously, quite a bit more gear. It was important to me that I had 2 tandem kayaks join me for support. I didn't want to be the fast. I didn't want to have anybody slower than me out there. I wanted to be the slowest person if possible. So I stayed in a solo boat, and the other guys, while they were able to maintain my speed by going a little bit slower perhaps, they didn't have to put out as much energy, and that was really important to me.
West, what do you think proved to be the biggest challenge for that final flat water section?
There were a couple of big ones. Personnel was an issue. There was some personality issues right off the bat in the flat water section. A couple of the guys had different expectations for the expedition than the expedition had as a whole, and tensions grew. As I mentioned earlier, the ability to get along is more important than anything else on an expedition, and the right attitude. And there was one guy who actually just started bringing the team down with his attitude, and we were all suffering, but he tended to bring it to the fore a little bit more than everybody else, and he ended up leaving the expedition about 2/3 of the way through. Another guy left because he got really sick from drinking the river water. He wanted to treat the river water with halazone pills instead of filtering like the rest of us. He thought it was more effective, and he got pretty sick and ended up flying back to the States in Iquitos. So the personnel challenges were big. Once the team had been whittled down to just 3 of us, that became less of an issue. The 3 of us gelled really well entering into Brazil, and then the challenges became just being able to take in enough calories in order to sustain our energy levels, and the river conditions. Once in Brazil, we started about 1,000 miles before the Atlantic Ocean, we started feeling the tidal effects. And so every day we'd get this, about every 6 hours, we'd get this tide coming right at us. And that really slowed our progress quite a bit. The river got really big too, and frequently we'd face some huge headwind. At times the river was 10 miles across. So you can imagine it's this giant flowing lake that occasionally flowed backwards, and occasionally gave you extremely strong winds. So we'd have to actually stop during those times because we were, paddling as slow as 2 miles an hour with a huge amount of effort. So the closer we got to the Atlantic, the harder it became just to make forward progress. And the waves, of course, when the tide came in, the waves, we were getting 12-foot breaking waves hitting us at times. And this was on a freshwater river. So it was very surreal.
Yeah, I saw the videos that you had, links to the videos you posted about the surf coming in from the tidal surge, and man, that was incredible.
Oh yeah, they were big, especially right at the end. That was a shocker.
West, where did you end in Brazil?
The mouth of the Amazon. I wanted to make sure that we were very accurate as to where we ended. I didn't want to, fall too short. I didn't want to paddle out into the Atlantic. So we did quite a bit of research with the Peruvian Coast Guard and the Peruvian Navy, and with cartographers and hydrologists in the United States and around the world. But no one really had a definitive answer as to, okay, at this point, this is the end of the Amazon River. So we consulted with our team. David Kelly, who was our whitewater team manager and ended up being the spokesman for the expedition, and Piotr Umiliensky and we put our heads together, and Piotr and David came up with a lat launch point, which was on an imaginary line between two pieces of land. One was a point on the northern bank of the Amazon River, and the other was a point on the southern bank of the Amazon River. And these 2 points jutted out into the Atlantic as far east as you can go. There was no more land past that. And so they drew a line, and on that line, we just found an imaginary point, or a real point, but it was on that line, and that marked the true end of the Amazon River. Now, when we were out there, this is about 75 miles east of Belém. Belém is the largest, the last large town we encountered on the Amazon River. So it's about 75 miles east of Belém into the, almost Atlantic proper. I mean, we're seeing ocean liners. We're seeing super tankers. I mean, the river is 90 miles wide at this point. So there's no buoy or dock or lighthouse or anything that says, okay, you're done. So all we could do was stare at the GPS. And as it turned out, we were out there at 3 a.m. because the little spot of dirt where we were trying to camp was quickly inundated with the tidal flow, and it went up 15 feet in a matter of 30 minutes. So it was pretty scary. We had to get up in the middle of the night and throw all our gear into our kayaks, and just, since we were out there with no land around, we decided, well, we might as well just try to make this push to the finish. So we started paddling out, east towards the Atlantic, and with the only bearings being on the GPS that was on the deck in front of me. It took about 6 hours to paddle that 12 miles because of the incoming tide. The waves were coming in at 20 and 30 feet. Luckily, none of those waves were cresting. We were so scared climbing these huge waves at 3 a.m. that one of these huge 30-footers would break over us, and we would be in terrible shape at that point. So we would just work our rears off and paddle as hard as we could up these hills. They were just watery hills that were coming right at us, and then shoot down the other side. And with our bows would dive into the troughs and then pop back up, and we'd climb the next wave. It was quite terrifying, to tell you the truth. None of us had ocean experience. We were flat water and somewhat whitewater paddlers. Well, this was an entirely different experience, especially in the middle of the night. Well, once we hit this point, which we called Stop Forest, I had labeled it on my GPS Stop Forest. We paddled a few hundred yards after that, just to assure that we had indeed, completed the Amazon River. And then we turned and headed towards the nearest piece of shore we could find, which was this spit of beach about 3 to 5 miles away. And we crashed in that beach and stayed there for the next few hours until making our way back into land.
West, what about the expedition are you most proud of?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. That's a great question. Well, the big picture is, being the first person to paddle from the farthest source of the Amazon to the sea. That's that feels like a very good accomplishment. Not necessarily for the physical aspect of it, because I think anybody could have done what I did physically, but pulling together the guys that helped me do it, the men and women that were part of the team, they're a good group of people. So I'm really glad my philosophy about that panned out, and I learned a lot from it. And I'll continue on with that trend in future expeditions. I guess that's what I'm most proud about is the people that I had out there and the people that I chose.
West, what do you want people to know about this expedition?
Well, I went into the Amazon expedition as a 50-year-old, probably not in the best of shape. I'll definitely not be adorning the cover of Men's Journal magazine with my shirt off by any means. And I don't have any, skills that are any better than anybody else's. I have, I can paddle some endurance, so I've got some, patience, I suppose. But really, I'm not more physically adept than your average person. And I'm certainly not a youngster. What I'd like people to take away is that an expedition like the Amazon expedition is within the reach of most people. I think people just don't realize that. It takes some perseverance. It takes, just the right attitude. And oddly enough, that's what separates failure from success is the attitude, not necessarily the ability. And I really hope people take that out of this and this expedition and realize that, superhumans don't complete these things. It's just people that continue every day in order to finish them. And that's it, as simple as that.
I read on your blog that you're soon to have a movie released and you are working on a book. Tell me about those.
The movie, we're in the last couple of weeks of post-production of the movie, and that's been taking most of my time. Like the expedition, I've never done a movie. And so I've been learning a lot and probably spending a lot more effort and resources on the movie than I would had I had more experience. I've hired a couple of guys to help me produce the movie, an editor and a graphics artist who are really talented. So we're a couple of weeks from having the movie in a can, and then we'll shop it around after that. That is quite a bit of an effort. I don't enjoy that as much as I enjoy writing the book. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to spend the time writing the book that I'd like because of the movie. I've got another expedition coming up pretty soon, and I want to make sure I have all of these things done before I go on that expedition. The book is much more detailed and nuanced than the movie, because the movie you have, an hour and a half of time to cram in a 4,100-mile expedition, whereas the book, I can leisurely go through it and convey what I need to. I much prefer writing the book. It's a much more enjoyable process. I don't have a publisher yet for the book. I haven't really looked for one, primarily because of the time taken for the documentary.
West, what's next for you?
I think in July of this year, I'm putting a team together, and we're going to go paddle the Volga River in July when the weather's good in Russia. It's Europe's longest river. So that's something that we've been working on now. Probably not as hard as I should be working on it, but I feel comfortable that we can handle that after the Amazon.
How can people get a hold of you if they want to learn more about this expedition?
I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about it. Pjort was such a good example at helping us with our expedition, and he was such a great mentor that I really like to emulate the help that he gave us with anybody that wants help with any expedition that I can give. They can contact me at amazonexpress@ymail.com.
Okay, West Hansen, congratulations on your accomplishment, and thanks for taking the time to come on the show and talk to me about it. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Paul. Thank you.
Recorded February 16, 2014. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.